Hey guys, Daryl here, Far From Stock. I'm putting together a little two-part series on front suspension choices, front suspension parts, and front steering for a suspension you might fabricate. Gonna be a little tedious, kind of long. I'm gonna split it in two parts. Hopefully I can keep you with me, but there will be tires burning in some parts. It won't be this truck right now, because it needs some TLC, but it will be soon. But I'm gonna find something to roll smoke off tires to keep you entertained during this boring technical video. So first thing we got to do, we got to jack that suspension up so we can see underneath it here. Higher. Now, this is not going to be for everybody. This is about someone who's interested in how it works and how suspension like this can be done yourself. If that's something you're interested in or into, then this is going to be for you. If it's not, you can look at my shiny truck while I talk here in the garage and kind of fumble over my own words. Okay, a lot of you guys ask about my suspension. You want to build air suspension. Well, I used Ruff Stuff Specialties parts. It doesn't matter if it's air, it doesn't matter if it's coils, it doesn't matter if it's coilovers. It's the same suspension, except for making space for coils, coilovers, or airbags. These are heavy-duty parts. They can be used for a play truck like this. It's meant to mostly be a street truck, and they can be used for a hardcore rock crawler or off-road truck. But the bottom line is, a linkage suspension is the same as long as you're not going to use leaf springs, pretty much. Now, there's a lot of variations you can make, and that's what I'm going to help you decide a little bit if you're interested in making your own link suspension system. This will help you to decide if you can, if you want to, and then how to decide maybe where some things would fit under your own truck, and really most importantly, how to select these parts from the Ruff Stuff website and make them work on your truck. The very first thing we need to talk about is steering. Steering is not your suspension, but it's more important than anything on your suspension. Your suspension is going to work, do certain things, rights and wrongs. Your steering must be right. You cannot have a truck out on the street you built yourself and it doesn't have good steering. So that's where we're going to start. This is a pitman arm, like many, and it comes right off the bottom of my steering box up there, and that connects to this Ruff Stuff Specialties crossover steering kit. This is the most basic one they have, works really good. It has OEM style tie rod ends, which make them completely street legal. No one would complain about them. You can use rod ends, and you can upgrade this to a Heim joint style rod end steering, and it works good, but some would complain maybe how you did it. Nobody complains about these. This is a high angle. It'll typically go at this end. This one is a regular angle tie rod, although it's 1 ton in strength, and it goes down here at this end. This end, at least on a Dana 60 with a kingpin style steering, to the steering arm. Bolts right on top of a kingpin 60, makes your steering a breeze compared to other axles. Other axles can be done, but a kingpin 60 really makes it simple. So from this connecting point to this tie rod end, to this tie rod end, to your steering arm is your drag link. Your drag link undoubtedly has to transcend from the high vehicle to the low axle. And as many people note with air suspension, and they see it go up and down, and they're thinking, how does that work? They can see that with a track bar right here, that there is going to be an arc to this, and maybe move your axle side to side as it goes up and down, and that's totally true. And that's the same with any suspension. A stock Dodge with coil springs, a desert race truck that jumps up and down, or air suspension that moves up and down. That drag link, this part right here, is what keeps your axle centered right to left under your truck. And yes, it is going to move on an arc. There are other drag link and steering setups you can make that are much more complicated The guys that are into desert racing have these things mastered and can make swing set style fancy pants steering that has humongous travel and doesn't move at all. But this is almost a OEM style setup. It works really good as long as you pay attention to how it's mounted and the do's and don'ts of drag link / track bar geometry. The number one thing is that they must be running on the same plane and the same length. So here we have one end of the track bar, and over here at the frame is the other end of the track bar. It is mounted about 2 inches higher than the pivot point, or even 1 inch higher than the pivot point of the drag link on the upper end. This drag link is ever so slightly longer. That's as far away as I could possibly get this, and that's pretty normal. But they are the same 1 inch or maybe 1.5 to 2 inches in height difference up here. So they're running on the same plane, same arc, and will not fight one another. You do not have to get those very far off to have bump steer. And bump steer is when your truck travels up and down, but these things don't match, and that requires your steering wheel to move in order to keep your vehicle in a straight line over that bump. Well, no one does that because your arms are on the steering wheel. What that means then is you go over a bump with your arms straight and your wheels go like this. So you went up and down, your truck went left and right, and it's a disaster. So, track bar and drag link, parallel, similar arc, hopefully as flat as possible. A big drop and you're gonna have an odd scenario because your axle is gonna have to swing around like this under the truck in order to maintain that geometry. So here we have a truck that's pretty tall at this level. This is higher than a lot of trucks, and we still have a generally small amount of drop from left to right. However, this is higher than I almost always run this truck. I run it down lower, and there the steering is perfect, and even the way I designed it, up and down, it's just right. Doesn't have any problems going 70 miles an hour over bumps, high or lower in the middle. So steering, drag link, track bar, very important. This is track bar bracket at the axle end. It's welded on the axle. They have a couple different kinds. One goes on the front of your axle and kind of leans forward where you need to put it, and then there's one that goes straight up from your axle. I put an airbag right behind it, so I wanted it coming out and forward. So not only did I get this one that's angled forward like this and mounts out on the front, but I modified it, cut it all up, and blended it into my airbag mount back here. Other end, for your track bar or panhard rod, whichever you want to call it, is the frame mount. Again, there's two different varieties of these. One would mount on the inside of your frame, one would mount on the outside of your frame. This one's just right for this style truck on the outside of the frame, and you can see how nicely it lines up with this steering drag link and pivot arm not being in the way. And this part literally goes up there, welds on, it's done. I just put it to where it's scooted up right behind the rear of the ball joint or tie rod in on the upper end of the drag link, and it's in shape. So if you ordered that for your first gen style Dodge or lots of modern trucks with a steering box on the outside of the frame, welds right on, it's done. So steering can be much more complicated than that, but that's the nuts and bolts of putting your steering under the truck, and the fact that it has to be right. And if you want to know more information, there's tons of research you can do on adequate steering setups for your custom suspension. Now let's rewind just a little bit. We were talking about steering. We talked about the ideal setup of the Dana 60 with a kingpin, because it makes you have an upper bolt-on part to work with, saves you some of that decline from frame to axle because it's actually raised up, and that's kind of the reason why this track bar bracket is raised up, is to mimic that. What if you have a ball joint style axle? Ford Dana 60 fronts are very good candidates for a custom suspension on any truck, even like this one. Dana 60s from the fronts of 1 ton, 3/4 ton Dodges, excellent candidate for swap. Dana 60 from an earlier Ford has the pinion on the other side like the last two I mentioned, still can have ball joint setups, all good axles. No problem, Ruff Stuff has your solution. You can see how this tie rod is on the top side of the knuckles. Some of you would have that, some of you wouldn't have that. That might be your opportunity to go with a Ruff Stuff part and flip it onto the top side. That gains you a little height. They can do that in multiple ways. We can drill out the top of the hole in your knuckle and put an insert in, and that will allow you the opportunity to orient it either direction. Same thing for the pitman arm. It can be drilled out. This is actually a Ruff Stuff insert in there now. So this was a tapered hole just like you would normally have, and I have drilled it out. You can see the large diameter drill, and then dropped in a Ruff Stuff insert, welded around the outside, and now it has a reverse taper and actually a larger taper that would fit that 1-ton tie rod in. So these kind of parts are available with Ruff Stuff too. This can happen to the tops or bottoms of your knuckles, or you can simply drill those out and swap to a hind joint or rod end style link at each end. Theoretically, everybody wants your rod ends to be double shear mounted, as opposed to these tie rod ends, which are allowed to be single shear mounted. Double shear, single shear. What do I mean? That is mounted to where if the shank broke, it would just fall off. Even though people tend to think that that's okay, they can fall apart and leave you on the side of the road. It's been done many times. When people see a hind joint end or rod end, they think it needs to be double shear mounted, as in bolted to your mounting point under here, and from this mounting point, an arm welded on and brought up over so that that bolt would have to shear in half, not just break off here in order to leave you stranded. I get it, and there's been a lot of junky rod ends or hind joints over the years that have led to that being even more important part of the equation. That hind joint is going to last longer and be stronger than that tie rod end by a long shot. Especially because if you do this for a steering situation, this upper misalignment spacer right here can be wider and bigger so that it does not allow this joint to wallow out, become loose, and then lift up off of here. So there's all kinds of reasons that you can mount that single shear, but you're going to hear some people say it must be double shear. I'm not going to argue with them. There's definitely a benefit in mounting it in double shear style, but these are allowed to be single shear mounted, and I've seen them fall off right on the side of the road, so I know it's no worse than what they did. In fact, I know it's better if you use quality hardware and the correct misalignment spacer. Let's get back to where I was saying, what do you do if you want to make your steering work if you have a ball joint style front end, not a kingpin where you got this nice fancy place to bolt to up there? Well, there's been lots of people that would make the steering knuckle into a custom knuckle. Take that knuckle off, weld up this style of high steering arm on there, and that works. You need to have somebody who knows what they're doing weld that. If you're going to do any kind of cast welding, it has to be done with the proper heating and cooling techniques. Even if you just go tack something up on cast, it wants to pop off, it's different. So that needs to be professionally done. Ruff Stuff has a solution that doesn't require that kind of extent, as long as you're not building the world's tallest monster truck. This is available with multiple styles of Y-link. You can get a tie rod end very similar to this that has a hole in it over here, and your drag link can mount in that hole. You can stack up rod ends like this. This rod end was over here on top of this knuckle, and you have another one on top of it. You can stack those up. You can see that if you started stacking those up, you'd have even more reason to have a double shear mounting point. But you also could put this on the bottom and put that drag link in on top. You just have to look at what you're building, what works for you, and then look at Ruff Stuff's catalog and parts selection and say, aha, that's my plan. Because there's going to be plenty of things that just don't work for you, but there's going to be plenty of things that do work for you. Those guys build every kind of vehicle. They're into off-roading, into four-wheeling, and into good driving vehicles, and they have a part that will work. If you were going to do a second gen style Dana 60, even maybe a third gen AAM, those are excellent front axles too. You probably have to put little bends in your tie rod end because it comes close to hitting some parts at full lock, to where you have to bring this out slightly and back. Maybe you'd have to do a little bend in your drag link, or in your drag link. You can see I did. It doesn't need it here, but as it folds down, it definitely needs that. So there's lots and lots of options. No two suspensions and no two steering setups are the same. Somebody has a different scenario. It's custom built. You're going to have to be the one to decide what fits and what doesn't fit. Hopefully, with this video, I'm helping you see what can and what can't fit. But now you see some of the parts we've got laying here that would make your front suspension and your front steering, and at least you can have an idea of how that may work on your truck. And then when you go to Ruff Stuff site, you're going to see that there's a whole bunch more options. And I'll throw a couple of pictures in this video. You're going to be able to see what some of these suspension links and designs are started from. What I haven't ever touched on so far is a triangulated front suspension. If it's an upper triangulated or a lower triangulated or an upper and lower triangulated 4-link system with 4 actual bars going to your frame with separate mounting points, that doesn't need a track bar. But that means it's not going to steer well. Because if this is your mechanical steering setup and it swings like this, that triangulated setup won't swing with that arc that this axle will, and steering's not going to work at all. A front, upper, and lower triangulated suspension system pretty much has to be built with full hydraulic steering. It's really the only setup, unless you're going to really put a lot of complex work into your steering so that it doesn't have any left to right movement. You could come over with your steering to a custom built swing set over here that goes across over there and then mounts to your knuckle or your tie rod over there, and that would limit some of that. Excuse me. The sky's the limit on things you can build. But if you're going with some simple traditional things like this, you're going to have to follow some of the general guidelines I've given you in this video so far. Right now, you're going to have to go straight to Ruff Stuff's website. You can DM or email us, but we don't have a link to their website yet for our store. But soon, farfromstockstore.com is going to have a link to Ruff Stuff's site where you can go get a discount by stopping at our page first and being our customer. Until then, you got to use Ruff Stuff's website. Well, I completely apologize for the lack of burnouts in videos recently. I'm going to get back on that. This truck's going to be out and running in no time, but it's not yet. But we're not going to leave you hanging. We have a special truck in the driveway, going to do a burnout. What do you do when you buy a parts donor truck before you take it apart? Duh, burn the tires off of it.